Welcome to the Educate US podcast with your host, Nick Zaveri, Dr. Stacy Schultz, and Dr. Patrice Fenton. Three former teachers and administrators talking about a wide range of topics happening in education. Time to educate us.
Hello again, Educate US podcast listeners. We're so excited to have you here. Patrice and I are joined by John and Laura today. They are the co-founders of Anther. And you're probably asking, well, what is Anther? So John or Laura, can you tell us what is Anther?
Yeah, so Laura and I met in graduate school, and we studied positive psychology at the University of Pennsylvania. And one of the things that we really loved about the work that we did together was learning about human thriving and human flourishing. And we decided, how do we translate all of our business acumen and our business knowledge? Lara's an entrepreneur, and I was in the corporate world for over 2 decades. How do we translate everything that we've learned into the art and science of thriving? So that's how Anther was founded. So we work with clients in diverse industries, helping them and their teams thrive. That's our focus.
Amazing. Amazing. What a beautiful sentiment. Thriving and human flourishing, which is really common to hear about right now, actually, as we're considering us at the crossroads of, technology and AI and what does that mean for humanity? And so I'll be interested to see how that comes up. And I think we're going to talk about that a little later. Before we do, we would love, love, love to hear your entrepreneurial stories and your educational experiences. And John, you just touched on a few of those a little bit, but we don't want to hear it through your achievements, as there are many, and you can see on their website, they both have many beautiful achievements and accomplishments, but really through your watershed moments. And Laura, maybe we can have you start us off.
Oh, well, thank you, Stacy. And John, that was a beautiful description of our co-creation of Anther and the vision of that. But, I didn't really intend to be an entrepreneur. I became an entrepreneur because it was born out of a passion I had for healthy living and eating well. And, I think people get confused. They hear entrepreneur and they think of like these big moments like launches and acquisitions and headlines, and it's associated with all of these kind of accomplishments. But really the why for me in creating my former company called Larabar was to really make a food product that just brought fun and liveliness to people's life, no matter what they did, and joy, nourishment. So I took that. I ended up building my company and had the ability to sell it to a large corporation, which was amazing. But what I'm most proud of about it is that I impacted people's lives in a positive way. And what I heard a lot along the way was that people really were looking for meaning and purpose and the need for inspiration and the courage to take those steps. So fast forward, I found myself at grad school at Penn studying positive psychology. And I'm just really curious about the human experience and how can we make our lives better? And what tools do we need? How can we learn? How can we support each other? So that was a bit of my entrepreneurial journey.
John, you want to share yours?
Yeah, sure. So I started my career as an entrepreneur, and then I made a shift into the corporate world and worked with large corporations like Walmart and Procter and Gamble, and climbed the corporate ladder and felt in that hamster wheel. I guess I was just running as fast as I could, but I wasn't getting anywhere. And at some point, I decided to leave the corporate world. This was about 4.5 years ago, and went to a startup and then did that and then burnt out. And so I left and I said, I've gotten the titles and I've gotten, the salary, and I got everything that I thought I wanted, and I still feel empty. So that pushed me to go to back to school and study psychology, and that pushed me to go into Georgetown's coaching program and start working with clients there. And I have found more meaning in working directly with clients and helping people thrive than I have in a lot of the other things that I did throughout my career.
Thank you both for sharing your stories. It resonates so much with my own experience and trajectory, and I just appreciate anyone who has the guts or the courage to follow their passion and do the thing that, brings them joy, makes them feel alive. So thank you both for answering that call, because I know it's not easy. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about Anther. Um, Tell us about the work you all do, and sort of what makes it so important to do that work in this particular moment that we're in, and even future casting, right? I imagine, at least from what I've read, that the work you all are doing is probably always going to be very important for some time to come. So I'd love to hear from your perspective, like what is it particularly about this moment that makes Anther so crucial and critical?
I'll give you my answer. I think I don't know if anybody would disagree, but we have a very uncertain world right now. And people are asking bigger questions like, who am I becoming? Why am I here? What really matters? And at Anther, whether we're working with individuals or groups or organizations, we really want to hold space for those questions and allow people to explore them safely, be psychologically safe, feel like they can really get to the deeper meaning of why in their life and what makes them tick beyond just, the actual work that they're doing and the job that they're having. But it's like, why are you there? Why do you spend all of this time with these people? How do you create more meaning in your relationships and connect with people? How do you make that ecosystem a really thriving ecosystem as one of the individuals? So that's one of the reasons that Anther came to be. John, do you want to tag on to that?
Yeah, I think Lara brought up an important concept here, the idea of psychological safety, right? 5,000 years ago, we were worried about our physical safety, right? If you heard a rustle in the bushes, you would run because, immediately that was the way in which we survived. Today, for most of us, not for all of us, but for many of us, our basic needs are covered, right? And what we are seeing are reactions as if there was a saber-toothed tiger following us, but it's to an email or to a text on social media, or I guess I was going to say a comment on social media or a text that a friend sends you. So I think the concept of psychological safety is very foundational to the work that we do, because the learning is different when you feel psychologically safe, right? And that's what research is telling us, that when we are psychologically safe, the way in which we digest information and integrate information is more profound, more meaningful, and it allows us to use that information to then thrive. Whereas when we learn through painful experiences, whether that's trauma or whatever it is that happens, yes, we still grow, and yes, we still have opportunities to overcome and to be strong, and yet it's a lot more painful to the human experience. So how do we balance those? There are things none of us can avoid, the painful things that are going to happen in life and the suffering. But if we can create psychologically safe environments where people can learn, it makes a big difference on the experience, and it allows us to move faster through the stages of development and grow.
Jen, I'm glad you expounded on that psychological safety, because we like to do literacy moments on the show, and that felt like a moment of what is that exactly? I think you did a nice job of talking about like physical safety and tapping a little into psychological safety. But if you were to concisely describe what is psychological safety and how might people begin to make a psychologically safe environment, what would you say? How would you define that?
What a great question. Well, I think there's many layers to that response. I think one good place to start is emotional regulation, right? When we are emotionally regulated and our nervous system is in a, call it a rest and digest state, when we are, in a calm place, when our breath is deep and our shoulders drop a little bit and we are not just worried about what's going to happen next, right? And we can be a little bit more present. I would say that those are some signs of being in a psychologically safe space. Of course, I think there are many, many layers to it, but that would be a good start maybe for our listeners.
Listen, if we even think you owe us money, you won't know what hit you. We'll put liens on everything you own. Raid your bank accounts, retirement fund, pension. You'll open up your paycheck and cry because we'll already have the money.
Don't fight the IRS alone. The Tax Doctor is here to help you negotiate your tax bill and reduce your stress. If you owe $10,000 or more in back taxes, do not call the IRS alone. Call a tax doctor now for a tax emergency analysis.
Psychological safety is one of my favorite topics, so I started to beam when you when you mentioned it. So I just wanted to give you an opportunity to speak to it if you so choose.
I think John did a beautiful job of articulating psychological safety. I mean, bottom line is that you're not worried. You can relax enough to start to digest and take in information and be receptive rather than worrying about what's going to happen next. And it sets the table for a really great place for people to learn and start to grow.
Agreed. It's one of my favorite topics to discuss and unpack with organizations, particularly because what I tend to find is that there isn't a ton of psychological safety in a lot of spaces. People have a lot of fear of, consequences, right? So if I speak out, if I challenge, if I come up with an idea, if I, want to take a day off, right? Like just a lot of things come up for folks when they are working in organizations that inhibit their ability to feel psychological safety and therefore to, as you all are working towards with folks, thrive in a lot of places. So I appreciate you all naming that. Laura, one of the things you mentioned is you have an art, which I appreciate, for bringing lightness into serious conversations. Would love to hear you talk a little bit about, I think that actually connects to psychological safety in a way. But what does that look like? What does that sound like in your work? How would you describe it for our listeners?
I love that you made that connection because that's the way I think about it when, I really love to connect with people deeply. I mean, I know it's impossible when you first meet somebody. It takes time to build the safety, right? The psychological safety, like you're safe around me. I'm not going to surprise you. I'm not going to, do anything that's unpredictable that makes you feel uncomfortable. So because I love deep talk, I try to come to every conversation present and aware of the person in front of me. And, starting with light talk, but moving into deep talk and creating an environment that's light and fun, but also meaningful. And that's something that I just do. I haven't even really thought about why I do that. I like to make people feel like they're comfortable. And to me, once you're comfortable and you feel safe, you're willing to open up. And I try to open up with vulnerability of myself and ideas that I have and things that happen to me so that people feel like, okay, this is a place I can do that. So that's really kind of how I show up. And I really try to consider who is in front of me, where they're at, what's going on, what their situation might be, and to try to really hone in on that stuff so that I'm not just, using kind of that I'm aware of who that person is. I think that's really, really important to tune in to who's in front of you. And instead of getting on your own kind of wavelength of like how you do things, it's like, how can you show up in a unique way for each person?
Yeah, and I think it's first of all, I can attest to that because Lara and I talk a lot, as you can imagine. And it's interesting because as we're building this business, I mean, Lara and I first formed a friendship that then led to us building Anther. Um, and it's interesting because we do have very profound conversations, and the transactional kind of gets relegated to the back. And I think that's such a different approach from what we see in daily interactions. Everything that we do has become so transactional in terms of how we engage with folks, how we communicate. It's always like I'm talking to so and so because I want to get X, Y, and Z, right? So that element of curiosity, I think it's really important to bring it. It's like I'm talking to you, but I want to know more about you. I want to understand where you're at today. What's going on? What are the experiences, the motivations, the emotions, the ideas, the dreams that you may have as a person, and that connection is much deeper and much more profound than what we're used to.
Yes, that is so true. And actually following up on this sentiment a little bit of, right now we often say there's a lot of tension between people connecting. So not only is it not necessarily deep, is it more transactional, but also we're struggling, it seems, particularly here in America, right, of really hearing one another. So how might we apply some of this thinking to that? What are suggestions you might give? And being that you both work with organizations and have worked with organizations, what kind of tips do you give them on how to really make space for everybody to be heard? And John, I know we'll talk about this in just a minute, but to feel seen as well.
Hmm. I'll jump in. I think one very simple strategy that works really, really well, and it's deceivingly simple, is to ask open-ended questions. Is to ask what and how questions instead of why, which can sound judgmental at times, or just questions that are the response is either a yes or a no, right? An open-ended question like, what are you thinking? What does this mean to you? How are you feeling? How would you look at this differently? I think that's a deceivingly simple strategy that can really help. And listen, it's hard at the beginning, right? You start asking the question, then you just want to jump into the response. But eventually, as you practice, that muscle gets stronger, and eventually you start finding out things that you never expected you were going to find out. So it's a really powerful way to engage with others. Lara?
I would tag on to what John is saying is I think of groups of people and organizations, and you're moving around and you're connecting, is to take a pause. Just take a pause before you talk to somebody, look them in the eye, let them know that you're really there and present. Not looking at a phone, not, reading something while you're talking to them. And, but if you show up and you show them that you're present, it makes a huge difference. It makes somebody go, oh, I'm being seen, I'm being acknowledged, and our conversation is meaningful now. It cues it up as meaningful. So I try to do that even at home because it's really easy within your family to zip around and say things. And I have a teenage son and very short conversations. And I try to just make sure I practice it in that environment. Let's put it that way. And it makes a difference.
Yeah, it does. And Patrice and I know as well, we have had our fair share of teenage son energy around us. And I think about it a lot because I also do have to handle carpools one day a week and have a car full of teenage boys, and engaging in conversation is always a skill with that at times, at that time of day, especially when they want to be on their phones, so it's really interesting. So thank you for that. So John, first of all, I want to say to everyone, you should definitely check out their website. It's going to be in our show links. and read about them. I mean, one of the things I love is that you both have like, how old were you both in those images?
Lara?
I think I was 10 or 11, something
Yeah.
like that.
I was probably 9 or 8, like just a little bit younger. Yes.
I love that so much. And it reminds me of a practice. Sorry, I know I'm backtracking a little before asking this question, but it reminds me of a practice that I learned. Sometimes when you're engaging with people and you're having a hard time really hearing them, that sometimes just see them as their younger self. And there's something so inviting about that that can open up something really different inside of you, a certain compassion towards hearing and seeing them differently. And that was actually in the positive intelligence coaching course that they talk about that exercise. And I really appreciated that. And just, I know I'm even smiling, like thinking about going to your website and seeing you both as your younger selves. It's so amazing. Um, so coming back to that, reading about both of you and what's there on the site, you mentioned that you like to create spaces where people feel seen, which we've been talking a lot about, and really helping others navigate uncertainty with clarity. Uncertainty with clarity, it almost feels like an oxymoron. So tell
We're
us
full of
about
those.
what's that?
We're full of those. Yes.
So yeah, tell us, what does that look and sound like when working with others?
Well, I think that's a deeply philosophical question, Stacy. Let's start from that. I think as we get into the work that we do at Anther, we realize that one of the things that we realize is that there are a lot of paradoxes. There are a lot of things that seem simple at first glance, and then when you start looking into them, they seem to be opposing, but they can actually live with each other, right? And in this case, I think uncertainty and clarity are two of those words that we tend to think that they are at odds with each other, and yet I think uncertainty is a reality. It's what we're all living these days, right? The world is moving a lot faster. Technology is moving at an alarming rate, right? Like the current political climate, which is making it very difficult for folks to know what's going to happen tomorrow or next week or in the next 6 months. And the question is, within that world of uncertainty, where can we lean into our agency, our ability to choose, and our ability to see options within that space? And yes, it's true, we're not going to be able to control a lot of things. We can't control what's in the news. We can't control a lot of the big decisions that are being made. And we can control how we respond to those decisions and how we lean into our ability to choose to navigate through that uncertainty. So I think the key word between uncertainty or the key word between uncertainty and clarity is agency. Is what is it? Where is it that we have a choice? Where is it that we can do something differently? And that's where the work that we do with our clients.
I love it. I love the approach that you all take, and the approach that you're describing, but also just the thinking that's associated with it. It really resonates with me in a lot of the work that I do as well. Really curious as you talk about this idea of helping people to feel seen and navigating this uncertainty and agency sort of being that bridge. The extent to which this is important in the age of like AI, and you mentioned technology a moment ago. I'm curious how the extent to which that's coming up in your work and how you're seeing this impact folks and how you're sort of helping people to navigate the uncertainty that's connected to that terrain, if you will.
You want to answer that, John? I mean, it's kind of an evolving situation. The AI situation is, we're embracing it in the sense that that's happening, right? It as John said, you have agency in it. You can decide, how do you want to interact with AI? How is it going to be? How there is uncertainty. We don't know how it's going to evolve. We don't know. People are worried about jobs, replacing human beings. It's really an unknown, but it's a a decision of how are you going to approach it, and what are you going to do yourself. In business, it's a great tool. It can be a really, really great tool. Does it replace human thinking? No, it does not. It can just be a quick tool. So, John, jump in. I mean, it's an evolving thought on the
Yeah.
AI.
Yeah, we're learning just like everybody else, right? Like we're learning how to live with it. I would say a couple of things that are important in my mind, like in our view to how AI interacts. Well, number one is technology, for the most part, has been really beneficial to humanity, right? And that doesn't mean that it's 100% beneficial, but for the most part, right? If you look at our life expectancy, child mortality rates, education or alphabetism rates, like we are by a lot of metrics, and I know this is going to sound to a lot of people, it's not going to sound right, but by a lot of metrics, we're in the golden age of humanity, right? And I'm not talking about today or since January or since last year. I'm talking, the past few decades, we have seen longevity extend over the last 100 years. 100 years ago, people used to live until they were 32. That was the average age. Now it's like 71 or 72 and rising quickly, right? So I think AI is going to have an impact on a lot of those metrics in a positive way. And I also think, based on our experience working with AI, that there's kind of like I'm going to go down a rabbit hole here, if I'm allowed, just for a second. There's this book called Notes on Complexity that talks about complexity theory, which is a really interesting. I'm not going to get into it because I understood about 40% of the book. But the big idea, which I think is really important, is that between order and chaos, there's a little sliver of randomness that exists. That it's a very human thing. That's where life happens. And I think AI is going to be able to work in the realm of order and in the realm of chaos. But that little sliver, that's reserved for us as humans. So it's going to be interesting how that plays out. That's just my hypothesis. I may listen to this podcast in 5 years and say, "Oh my God, was I wrong?" But anyway, that's kind of where my head is going these days.
Yeah, I love that. And I love reading about the complexity theory. So maybe one day, Patrice, we should talk more about that. And there's a lot in there around sort of the paradox, right, of clarity and uncertainty actually within that theory, even. So a lot of interesting things. So before, we sign off here today, we like to leave our listeners with a little bit of hope or aspiration. And since you both really focus on thriving, I thought it might be nice to give listeners something to think about in how they might drive their life towards thriving and thriving even more if they already feel like they're there. And Lara, will you start us off?
One of the things I do in a daily practice is no matter who I'm interacting with, whether I walk out my door, I walk my dogs a lot. I have two Labradors. I'm out and about all the time, and I come across people, and I just think, how can I make it so that they came across me? They don't even know me, but they were so happy they did because I'm leading with positivity. I'm leading with a hello. I just make their day feel brighter. And it's not a hard thing to do. We're passing by each other all the time. And just a smile, a hello, being present. It's a very, very simple way to interact with the world, outside of your own home and all of that. So that's something simple I do all the time and I think about.
Yeah. Never underestimate the power of a smile. I'm going to share, this is from a class that Lara and I took called Introduction to Positive Interventions. But the professor's name is James Pawelski, and I'm lucky enough to be an assistant instructor in his class. And he shared this exercise that I started doing, and it was like, shockingly impactful on my well-being. Every morning, asking 3 questions. What am I grateful for? What am I excited about? And what am I proud of? What am I proud of? What am I grateful for? What am I excited about? And what am I proud of?
So, as we wrap up, we love to have our guests just let our listeners know how they can follow up, keep in touch with your work and your progress and the things that you have going on in the world. So please, we mentioned we'll include your website in our show notes, so that'll be there. But if there's any other way that our listeners can follow your work, please, now's the opportunity. Let them know.
Yeah, our website is the best way really to reach us right now, antherglobal.com. And then we're on Instagram under Anther and LinkedIn and Facebook. So those are the best places to find us currently. And we have lots of things in the works. So we will be updating our website and social media as things come up and are developed.
And we'd love to hear from people. So if any of your listeners are a little curious, or they were, if there was something that kind of stuck out for you and you want to reach out, send us an email, go to the website, find us on social media. We love to hear from folks. So that's how we learn, right? From other people. So yeah. And this was wonderful. We are so grateful that you gave us this space, Stacy and Patrice, and that you're allowing us to share a little bit of our message. It means a lot. So thank you.
You took our thank you. Thank you both. We appreciate you coming on and sharing with our listeners. It's such an important topic. It's one that we've really been diving in and exploring a lot through the idea of abundance and thriving and connecting. So we really appreciate that.